Kia ora, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to look at 91223 Economic Growth paper from Level 2 from 2023, and we're going to be focusing on the questions, just running through the paper, talking about each question as it comes up, what kind of structure we might want to use to approach the question, and looking at some techniques to how to answer the question. So let's start with question 1, aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Of course, when this comes up, we're going to be very happy in the exam because we know this model really well. It's very predictable, comes up year after year. So here we go. Large multinational companies such as Microsoft and Amazon are spending billions of dollars on data centers in the Auckland region. The data centers provide cloud-based storage facilities, saving companies money as they're able to move more services online. It is also expected that the data centers will accelerate innovation and improve the digital skills of the workforce. Auckland Transport is a Microsoft customer and projects it will save $2.5 million annually. In the graph, it's got two shifts. It's got this increase in AS and it's got an increase in AD. So both things are increasing. When we see the AD AS, we want to think about the following equations. AD equals AS. AD equals C plus I plus G plus X minus. So that's our equation for aggregate demand. And then equation for aggregate supply, which is AS, or not an equation, but the components, and the way we can remember the components is copy printer, COP for cost of production, P for population, I for imported raw materials, PR for productivity, IN for infrastructure, TE for technology, and then R for resources. And so now we're going to explain each shift, the shift in aggregate supply and the shift in aggregate demand, shown on graph 1 due to the investment in large data centers. So I'm going to start with the thing that I think happens first, which is the spending of the billions of dollars in the markets for construction or creating the data centers. And so that's going to look like this in the exam. And this is our structure that we're going to go with too, which is to say cause, component, curve, consequence. So we've got our cause to begin with, which is this. Microsoft and Amazon are spending billions of dollars on infrastructure in New Zealand. So it's the spending of billions of dollars creating the infrastructure in New Zealand and their private businesses. Components. This is an example of business investment spending. So we're relating the cause to a component of aggregate demand. Curve. As I is a component of AD plus equals C plus I plus G plus X minus. An increase in I will cause an increase in aggregate demand, shifting AD curve to the right to AD1. So we're taking that component and linking it to one of the curves shifting and saying why. And then the consequence, what's the impact on growth? Because this is the growth paper. This will result in increase in growth, real GDP. So that's our answer for 1, over the first part, and let's maybe make it a bit smaller. So for aggregate supply, the cause is going to be the new infrastructure will help improve the digital skills of the population and reduce the cost of data storage. And we're going to get that right from the task here, saving companies money, and the data centers will accelerate digital innovation. This will reduce the cost of production. So cost of production is the reference to the first part here, COP for aggregate supply. For the business, as costs decrease and productivity rises. Curve, so link those to the curve. As costs decrease, businesses will increase supply as production is more profitable, shifting AS to AS1. So we're actually going to say aggregate supply there, so we're really clear we're talking about aggregate. Consequence, this will result in an increase in growth, real GDP. Both shifts combine to shift Y to Y1, representing economic growth. Here we go for the second question. During COVID-19 lockdowns of 21 and 22, many workers were forced to work from home. Once the lockdowns ended, some of the workers remained as hybrid workers, spending some days in the office, some days at home. One of the advantages to working from home were the savings, one survey suggesting the average worker can save $250 per week. This included lower commuting costs and lower spending on food. Businesses also benefiting from the workers, one such study showing they can save $1,100 per year if an employee works at home for 2 or 3 days a week. These savings include reduced rent, lower absenteeism, higher productivity, and with less traffic on the road, there was less traffic congestion. So our job is again to show the two shifts. The first thing to be noted here is while AS is increasing because of that decrease in cost of production, AD is actually decreasing because of the decrease in consumer spending on the travel and the food costs associated with working from the office. So they're shifting either way, and we're going to post up both of those answers so we can talk about them here. So cause, working from home will lead to less spending on commuting costs and at cafes. So there's going to be decreased costs and spending on those things for workers. Component, these costs are examples of consumer spending, so link that to a component of AD using the equation. Curve, as C is a component of AD, a fall in consumption spending will cause a fall in aggregate demand from AD to AD2. Consequence, this will result in a fall in GDP and negative economic growth. So I've got that negative AD to AD2. On the other hand, we've got working from home will lead to lower cost for businesses as less office space is required. So the cause, again, linking it to the context, bringing it down from the top. Component, there will also be more productive workers as absenteeism is reduced, and there will be less congestion on roads, lowering the cost for other businesses and such as transport companies. Curve, in order to maintain profits, aggregate supply will increase. This will cause an increase to an AS to AS2. Curve, this will result in an increase in economic growth. So they've got one causing a decrease, one causing an increase, overall getting a small increase. So then let's compare the two in part C. C's got a much less prescriptive answer, but still we can definitely work with it, some formatting. So we want to compare the two things. So say one thing happens, whereas the other thing happens. In this case, we're going to talk about the offsetting compared to both curve shifting, and then the size and the number of industries impacted. So building data centers increases both aggregate supply and aggregate demand curve, both leading to AS and AD increasing, leading to GDP rising. So they're both increasing. Whereas working from home increases AS but decreases AD. So we see a counteracting or an offsetting. The effects on GDP are going to be much less. To add to that, working from home only impacts a few industries. For example, a teacher, a farmer, a doctor, a nurse, fireman, all cannot work from home. So there's only a few industries that can work from home. So it's a smaller proportion of the population that's affected by that state cost savings. Overall, the increase in real GDP from Y to Y1 in graph 1 is greater than the increase in real GDP from Y to Y2 in graph 2. So referring to the graph there, you can literally talk about the size of the shift in order to get your full answer. Let's look at question 2. Impacts of economic growth. The number of overseas visitors to New Zealand is nearly back to pre-COVID-19 levels in some regions of the economy. In September 2022, more than 30,000 international tourists, the same number as in September 2019, arrived in Queenstown International Airport. And then we've got the circular flow model here with all 5 sectors and the different money flows between them. And question A, referring to model 1 above, explain how an increase in the number of tourists in the Queenstown could increase growth in New Zealand. So of course, tourist is going to be, I don't want to highlight all of that, tourist is going to be overseas because it's customers from overseas spending money in New Zealand, and they're going to be giving export receipts as they buy exports, so they buy goods and services from New Zealand's producers. The money's going to come from the overseas bank account into the New Zealand business, and that means producers are going to increase their output and they're going to receive more income for export receipts. So that's flow 1, right? We always want to start in this question talking about the injection. So the injection is going to come in from overseas and it's going to come into the 2 sector model, which is this sector right here. It's going to come out of overseas into producers. Then producers are going to increase their output. So the second thing that happens is producers are rising their output. They're producing more goods and services as they sell more to those overseas customers. And then we want to talk about 2 more flows. So in total, we want to talk about an injection, and then another flow, and then a flow on from that. So 3 flows altogether, and then link it back to growth, because of course the question is asking us, referring to 101, explain how an increase in the number of tourists would increase growth in New Zealand. So we want to link it back to growth. So let's paste our answer into there, and then we'll walk through it. So an increase in the visitors to Queenstown will increase export receipts, an injection, so state that it's an injection, as spending occurs on accommodation and activities in the area. This will cause an increase in output as producers increase quantity to sell to tourists. So they're producing more to sell overseas, they're going to get more export receipts back in. As output increases, there will be an increase in the number of households employed. So more people need to work in order to produce those increased goods and services. Therefore, those households will now have a higher income to spend on goods and services from producers in Queenstown and other areas in New Zealand. So that's more income and then more ability to spend that consumption. The households that receive this increase in income will then spend more on goods and services in the local economy, increasing consumer spending, C. So we have nailed down 3 sectors and 3 different flows. We've got overseas producers, households, export receipts, income and consumption. So we always want to be doing an injection, so the export receipts, and then income and consumption. Those are excellent ways to show growth. And then we also want to talk about increased output whenever we can. So let's go to question B. As the tourism industry continues to recover, the industry Association Tourism Industry Aotearoa, TIA, has committed to sustainable tourism by 2025. Tourist business that sign up to the commitment must pledge to meet economic, environmental, community and quality standards. This is expected to further increase the number of international tourists visiting New Zealand due to the growth in the worldwide demand for sustainable tourism. Compare and contrast the successful transition to sustainable tourism on different regional growth rates in New Zealand. So before we bring in my answer, I'm going to say tourist spots that are going to benefit are those where tourists already go. So places like Rotorua or Queenstown, where tourists, maybe Auckland, where tourists already flood to, they're going to continue to be busy with tourists, and more tourists are going to go to those areas. Places that aren't so popular with tourists, maybe Hamilton or Waikato, maybe Gisborne, places that don't typically see a lot of tourists, they're going to continue to be worse off. They're not going to be as better off as the areas with high tourism. So let's paste in our answer over here, because we're just comparing 2 groups. On the one hand this happens, on the other hand this happens. The increased number of tourists in New Zealand will lead to greater growth in regions that already rely on tourism and offer attractions that are sustainable tourist activities. For example, the Queenstown and Rotorua regions continue to develop their attractions as sustainable. Then it is likely that these regions will grow at an increased rate compared to other regions. These other regions which do not have tourism as a contributor to output may see small growth, as there may be an increase in the number of tourists visiting and increased spending due to higher incomes in other regions. But the main idea here is if you're already benefiting from the tourism and the sustainable targets, you're going to continue to benefit from that. Workers in different industries, for example, the tourism and agriculture sectors. This is almost a parallel question. It's just talking about workers, but you're going to say the same thing. If you're in the industry, if you're in the good industry, then you are going to be better off, because you're becoming better off, you're getting more income, you're getting more job opportunities, you're getting more job security, you're getting more training, increase in skills. All of those things are true for tourism, whereas agriculture, you're not likely to get those same things because the growth is not happening in the agricultural sector the same way it's happening in tourism. However, you might say that some of the agricultural workers could even step out of that industry and move into tourism if they're going to see an increase in income. That might be an encouragement for them to increase their income. So workers in the tourism industry are likely to have higher paying jobs and increased job security as demand for sustainable tourism increases. That's that concept of derived demand. As the quality of the tourism experience increases, businesses will need staff with higher skills, and this will mean increased incomes for those staff with those skills. Workers in agricultural sectors may see the gap between the earnings in tourism and in agricultural sectors increase, and they may be attracted to the tourism sector. This could require some retraining to be part of the sector. So the only thing I'll change here is I would say however, comma, and then workers in the tourism industry. Let's go to question 3. Okay, so question 3. Real GDP grew by 3.5% in December quarter of 2021. This compared to a 0.6% decrease in real GDP in the December quarter of 2022. What does the letters GDP stand for? Gross domestic product. There's no help you can get with that one. It's just about memorizing the definition. So gross domestic product. I like to remember GDP as gross means total. Domestic, when I fly domestically, I'm flying within my country. So within my country or national. And then product, like a product that we produce. A product is all the things that we produce. So total, national, things we produce, or everything we produce in our country in a given year. Explain 2 reasons why an increase in real GDP is better for the New Zealand economy than a decrease. In fact, let's paste in our gross domestic product answer, and then let's write an answer in here as well. So there's many reasons why an increase is better than a decrease. I've chosen 2 different reasons. What you could do here is try and write one reason and then write the opposite reason. but I don't think that's a good idea. What you want to do is show the market that you know as much as possible, so take the opportunity to show that. So I've said an increase in real GDP means that there are more goods and services produced, which means consumers can satisfy more of their unlimited wants. So there's more things in our economy in order to satisfy the people of that economy. And then B, or 2, I could say a disadvantage of real GDP, or a disadvantage of decrease in real GDP, and I could say, oh, if it's a decrease, we're going to have less goods, but that's not ideal. I'm going to show something different. So I'm going to say a decrease in real GDP means that there will be less tax, reducing the ability of the government to fund its spending. So we might end up with some reduced healthcare services or reduced education if we've got reduced GDP. Why is using real GDP to measure economic growth better than using nominal GDP? And of course, it's because nominal GDP is not adjusted for inflation, and so it can look like we're getting an increase in output, but we're actually getting less or the same amount of goods and services. So real GDP reflects the actual amount of goods we're producing, not just the monetary value. So real GDP is adjusted for changes in the price level by removing the impact of inflation. An increase in real GDP means that the actual output of the goods and services is increasing, meaning we're getting more goods and services. And increasing the nominal GDP does not necessarily mean that output is rising, as it measures the value of the output at the current prices. Output may have stayed the same, but prices have increased. So we could produce the same amount of goods, but inflation means that they're worth, that the price is higher, or the price level has risen. So it looks like we've produced more goods and services, but we have not. We've produced the same amount and the same value. Other measures of growth will include a range of economic and quality of life indicators. For example, the Human Development Index. Compare and contrast, which means use those words however, whereas, on the other hand, to compare the usefulness of using real GDP to measure overall changes in growth with one other measure of economic growth. So you can choose the one that's most relevant to you, or the one maybe you've spoken about in a class with your teacher. And this is an opportunity to write down a lot of things that you know, and really show the market that you know what you're talking about in terms of real GDP. So the first thing that we've done here is take this real GDP and say the strength of real GDP is it's objective and measurable. It's linked to the expenditure in the economy and the income in the economy. I'm actually going to delete that one. And I'm going to say it can be compared to different time periods in different countries, because I think that's the best one. It's objective. You can compare it with other countries, or you compare it to your own self in years and see if your country's getting better or getting worse, and then make decisions based on that. Weaknesses of real GDP. Let's put that in there. Weaknesses of real GDP does not include non-economic factors such as growing your own vegetables. It does not include, and this isn't always great, but it doesn't include black market activities, which might be a large income stream for a good percentage of your population. And it's also useful to note that in lots of third world countries, there's huge black market activities, so the economy might be much larger than is reported in their systems, and so it's difficult to compare when that's going on. And then lastly, activities that reduce overall welfare, such as pollution, are counted as increasing real GDP. A good example for this is a prison being built and a school being built are worth the same if you look at real GDP. However, a prison is going to put people away in jail and move them out of society, where a school is obviously going to educate and be better off. But those two things are shown as the same in a real GDP equation. And then we have to compare it to another one. So on the other hand, measures such as HDI or the Living Standards Framework or the net social welfare use a combination of indicators to measure economic growth. These include real GDP, but also lots of other measures such as life expectancy, education levels. It gives a broader picture as to whether the economy is producing better outcomes for its citizens. Or another good example is inequality can be measured in another measure of economic growth. Therefore, it may be more useful than relying on only the increases in the output of goods and services. Now, it doesn't say to say which one's better or which one's worse. Maybe another downside for this would be it's difficult to compare. It's difficult to compare to different time periods. It's hard to measure. It can be not very objective. There's lots of things that you could write in there, and you've got quite a lot of room to write if you need to. But you need to know what the strengths are, know what the weaknesses are, and then be able to compare them to your choice of other measure.